This is the Honest Garage Podcast, the Expert Spotlight Edition, where experts help you drive toward success.
Today on the Honest Garage Podcast Expert Series, we're talking about the one thing that quietly controls everything in your shop, your numbers. Because if you don't understand your numbers, you don't understand your business, and you end up making decisions off stress, not facts. Alongside me is Honest Mechanic Marketing's agency growth partner, Paul Regalado. Our guest is Hunt Demarest, partner at Paar Melis and Associates, a firm that works heavily with auto repair shops. Hunt also hosts the podcast Business by the Numbers, and he wrote the book Beyond the Bays, all built around one mission, helping shop owners understand what their numbers are really telling them. Hunt, welcome to the Expert Series. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you taking the time.
Excited to have you share your insights with all of our guests.
Hey, we're going to try, right?
That's right.
Yeah, before we really dig into stuff, I know a lot of shop owners treat accounting a once a year event. What do you see happen when they do that and the problems that show up downstream?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have a unique view of most of my clients are forced to do this more than once a year. But yeah, like you said, most of them before they were with me, they were once a year. And some of them will admit that they were none a year. We see that the classic example, I would say for all self-employed people, but a lot of auto repair shop owners, it's not familiar with them, right? You don't grow up doing accounting, you don't grow up doing taxes. People tend to stray away from stuff that they're not familiar with. We also have a larger thing of people have a very unhealthy relationship a lot of time with finances, which is all a perfect storm for the average self-employed and shop owner to really despise and not even really look at their accounting or taxes much.
Yeah, for sure. You've made the point on our prep show that owners don't understand their financials. They really don't understand their business or how to run them. What are like some top 2 to 3 blind spots, even in good shops?
Yeah. Top blind spots on this. This is tricky, but let's go to one that kind of affects all people, and then we'll go big and small. So the first one that affects it is go back to what you plan to do with your business this year, right? Truly think about what you've told your coach, what you told your comrades, what you've told your team, and where did that come from? Most people go to a projection. They say one of two things, right? I'm going to do more in sales. I'm going to do more in profit, right? So the first mistake is that those numbers you just pulled out of your you-know-what, right? They weren't based in reality. That might actually lead to success, lead to failure. The next thing that comes out of that one is probably just how most people do this, right? When you went back and you actually said to yourself, Hun, I actually set that sales target because of X, Y, and Z. I will go back and say, second mistake is setting a sales target. People love sales targets, but sales targets are just that. Paul, David, do you want a business that does a ton in sale, a ton in profit? Everyone is actually looking for the business that does the smallest amount of sales as long as it gives them their required profit. So mistake number 2 on that one is, hey, if you're trying to set this based on a sales target, that's not really what you want. We want profit. And lastly is no one can ever actually set an accurate target on this. And let's say maybe you do set an accurate target. If you don't understand your numbers and you don't look at them and look at current figures on this, you might be this time 12 months later and being able to pick up the pieces and say, hey, did we hit it or did we not hit it? But unless you're looking at this stuff real time, you're going to be way lagging on this stuff when you should actually be making real time decisions.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand like what gets measured gets done, and they forget about like looking at their numbers until quarterly check-ins or biannual check-ins at best case scenario for a lot of people. And they don't even know if they're on target throughout the year. By the time they realize they're not, they have no direction.
Yeah. Even for, let's say you have a major change, right? Like I will argue that even someone that doesn't understand their financials will feel that major change, right? You go from a 50% margin to 20%. You might not know why your numbers are down, but you're going to know that they're down. My bigger argument to people, as I say, is like, hey, you've been in the business 20 years, 25, right? I'm not going to tell you what a parts matrix is. You guys know how to run this business. But what I tell people is if you have $1 million a year shop, you're not going to feel 5%, right? You will feel it in the long run because you won't have that money, but you're not going to have that same knee-jerk reaction of something is going on, right? So if you have $1 million a year shop, that 5% could erode 50 grand in profit, right? Very quickly. What we're trying to do is we're trying to have that 5% go in a positive direction, right? A lot of my clients don't have a massive change. You're doing well on parts, you're doing well on labor. We shouldn't expect to double our profit. That's not realistic. But if we know what our profit is, if we know what our numbers are, we can maintain these. And if anything, lean forward a little bit and catch a couple extra points.
Yeah. So talking about what's realistic and the numbers, importantly, what are the numbers that shop owners really should be paying attention to on their scoreboard, if you will?
Yeah, there's a ton of them out there, right? So what I would say is we want to look at leading and trailing indicators, right? So a great example of a trailing indicator is profit, right? So if you go and you say, I want to make more profit, if you want to go and measure your profit, again, you're just measuring daily outputs. It's never going to give your guys any sort of guidance or anything like that. Most of the time when it comes down to profit, it's really a metric of two things, sales and gross profit, right? Hey, you need a certain amount of sales, if an assumed gross profit, but at the end of the day, you need a gross profit to pay your overhead and hopefully have enough left over. But even when you break that stuff down, what does this go to? It goes to targets depending on who it is, right? If I'm talking to an advisor, needs to be looking at sales and gross profit, right? Two things. I'm out of frame here. Don't go to your technicians, right? What a terrible thing to tell your technicians to keep an eye on. Hey, if you're a technician, you don't sell this stuff, you don't mark it up, you're there to turn hours. Right. So I'm saying my advisors, you got to look at sales. You got to look at gross profit. You have a target for both. You hit those, will be fine. Same thing back of the house. Hey, guys, you have one job alone to turn hours. Here's your target. Right. Those people are focused on that. Counters focused on the other side of it. You as an owner, right, have to be in charge of all of it. At the end of the day, you're really just looking at that profit. Right. If those two groups made those three numbers where they need to be, that trailing indicator will look okay. But sometimes the biggest unknown there is the owners figuring out that link, right? I know I want this to get better, but what's my funnel point? What is actually the key to me not having profit? Is it sales? Is it gross profit? Is it productivity? Or some combination of the three?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And it's a situation where the owner has to learn to elevate himself to where he can just focus, or she can just focus on that gross profit number, and trust the delegate part of that sentence, where you're getting the right numbers to the right people and have the right people in the right place.
Absolutely.
Let's be practical, right? Let's talk about weekly check-ins or monthly check-ins for these owners. What should they be looking at to keep both of those two, the service and the operations, functioning right?
So like we talk about this stuff and I use a lot of big words, and I even heard my monologue before, and I don't want to scare people off, right? These are terms you haven't been familiar with before, but you guys know this, right? You know how many cars you're touching, you know how many hours your guys are turning, right? So first things first on this is don't get overloaded. But really what you're trying to do is don't try to go look at your financials for everything, right? Have an expectation in mind and have an ultimate objective. Because people say, how do I look at my numbers? Depending on what I'm looking for, right? If I'm looking for fraud, it's a lot different than a weekly check-in. So weekly check-in should be just that, right? Expectations versus reality. Hey, we're trying to do $100,000 in sales a month. Roughly, we need to be doing $25,000, $30,000 in sales a week. And so what I'm doing on a weekly basis is making sure I'm making my month. Hey, sales are on track, hours are on track, schedule looks good for this upcoming week to be the same. I'm going and telling my team, hey, we all have an ultimate goal, right? Just like all this is inputs and outputs, weeks are inputs and the month is the output, right? So just making sure that you're on track there. And then if you're on track, letting the team know, hey guys, what we did last week is exactly what we need to do this week, right? Sales were there, prices were there, production was there, keep it on. If it's below, right, a quick kind of course correction or a quick kind of triage on why this happened. I mean, the same flip side, right? Guys, if you blew it out of the water, sometimes people move it on and say, why do we need to triage that, right? If anything, it's, man, let's go and really unpack. How were we able to do that much in production? And whatever we did that worked, let's try and do it again. And yeah, trying to replicate a couple of good weeks, turn to a couple of good months, turn into a couple of good years, and a couple of good years turn into hopefully a really good business.
That's right.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people come to you when they're with the thing of, hey, we want to grow our business, or we want to grow our profit at the very least.
Yeah.
And we want to get more out of what we're already doing. You've talked on our prep call about backing into those goals from profit. Can you walk us through the order of operations on that? And what do you solve first? What's the first piece that you're looking at?
So generally, like when I'm setting sales targets on this, I always tell people like this business can be whatever you want it to be, right? This is why you're self-employed. If you want to make $1 billion a year, I'll show you the formula, right? Now, in practice to get there, I can't do that, but we can build the model. So generally what we do is we talk to people and we say, hey, what do you want this life to look like? What kind of profit do you want to take out of the business? That is your first driver, right? A lot of people come out and say, hey, hon, I want to make 200 grand a year, right? If you want to make 200 grand a year, right? Cool target. And we got it. We can go, we can make that business. One thing that people don't realize a lot is if you have debt, you got to factor that in, right? If you have debt payments, that comes out of your profit. So if let's say you have 50 grand of debt, now you need to make $250,000 worth of profit just to have the money that you need. But more or less, let's say in a simple business, you want to make $200,000 of net profit. You then need to add in what your overhead is, because net profit plus overhead is the gross profit that you need. So let's say that your overhead is $300,000, right? You need $500,000 of gross profit to cover your overhead, and then you'll have $200,000 left over. Now that you have that gross profit, you really have everything that you can solve, right? Because let's say that you had a business that is pure profit, right? The technicians are free. You don't have any parts. You only need to sell $500,000 in sales. You only need a $500,000 a year shop to give you the money that you need. Most shops are running closer to around a 50% gross profit margin. So if you have 50% gross profit margin, you probably need around $1 million in sales. The reason that I wanted to use that example is two things. That 50, 30, 20 percentage I talked about is the going model of most shops, right? You got 50% gross profit. Your overhead should be 30% or less of your sales, leaving you with a 20% net income. But two big pieces of it anyone can take out of this is some people look at advisor here. Some people look at general manager there, right? It doesn't matter. If you want 20% net income, your gross profit has to be 20% higher than your overhead, right? Maybe you run a 60-40 model. You're still leaving 20% left over. But the most important piece there that I talked about was your gross profit percentage is how hard you're working, right? If you want to work really hard and do a lot of work, you can operate a shop at 30% gross profit margin, but you're going to need to do 3 times as much sales than a shop that's operating at 100%, right? So when you're trying to grow your business, this is working harder or working smarter, right? If you have a low gross profit business, you can just work harder, right? Open up Saturdays, open up Sundays. You're going to outrun your overhead and you're going to do just fine. Most shops that want to work smarter, not harder, say, hey, if I price the work that I'm doing right now correctly on it, I don't need more cars. I don't need really more hours on this. We have the business right here under our building.
Yeah. It sounds to me that these conversations need to be had by all the owners, but they don't always have that. Would you recommend that they have a CPA or somebody that they can go to and talk these numbers through at the very beginning every year? Would you recommend that they have an expert?
Yeah, you have to be comfortable in this, right? Obviously, we specialize in automotive repair shops. We have clients all across the country. I believe we are the best at what we do, but also I'm not going to inflate my own ego that this is rocket science, right? And so as much as I say you should be talking with a professional, right? It's the same exact thing like our clients talking to their customers, right? Yeah, at the end of the day, their technicians are probably trained professionals. There's a number of jobs that their customers can do themselves and they will be just fine, right? But you got to be careful with it. So if you're a person and you're saying, hey, hon, I'm pretty savvy, right? I went to school. I liked finance. I'm interested in this stuff. Hey, maybe you don't need a professional. There's a ton of information out there. You can talk with your coach. You can get into different groups on this. The exact opposite of this, if you don't have that education piece, you could learn for the next couple of years and really get familiar yourself as well too, or you hire a professional, right? So at the end of the day, if you want to do this yourself, great. If you want to do it with the help of others, perfect. Really, there's no sort of replacement for your own interest. I always tell people, I have one type of client that is the worst type of client, and I won't take you as a client at all, is if you're not interested in your numbers, right? Anyone that is interested in the numbers, we've always been able to give them the ability to read this and understand that themselves. If you don't have any interest, then you're never going to have any ability.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that.
And I think that's such an obvious thing, but for a lot of shop owners out there, we see this on the marketing side too, where it's really tempting to want to go back into tech mode and want to get back into working on the cars instead of thinking about business at this level. And so they are looking for a partner where they can just hand things off to. And can you just real quick explain, at least from your point of view, like what that tends to lead to, and how you see that play out for most shop owners who attempt that?
Yeah, you can have a couple aspects of this, right? If we want to go full kind of spectrum on it, yeah, you can have owners that are way too removed from the business, right? Like I have people that live on the other side of the country, they operate businesses on it, but those people have to be very strong from a management side, right? They used to be in the bays and that's how they managed. The guys really listened to them when they're on the tools, they're turning wrenches shoulder to shoulder on it, right? They sold out, went to a coaching seminar, they got onto the counter, the guys gave them some grief, but hey, he's still on the counter, he's still part of us. So making that transition to, hey, I'm not alongside you guys, but still really here running it is a really hard thing for a lot of shops, right? It's really tricky for this industry to move away from that. But what most people realize is turning wrenches is not the most profitable use of your time, right? Like when you're first starting your business, it probably is, right? You're probably getting $130, $150 an hour, right? That's like a $300,000 a year job. That's probably the most profitable use of your time. But if you are now late stage in your business, do you think it is more valuable use of your time to turn a wrench or sit down with your advisors and maybe do some coaching with them? Hey, instead of making $150 an hour, you can make an extra $100 an hour with their increased sales skill. Maybe you want to go out and find fleet accounts, right? That's going to lead to a lot more money, right? And like we talked about before, if you're out there turning your wrenches, not having these conversations, maybe you got 5% of your profit eroding away, right? Maybe you're paying 20% too much in taxes because you're not having these conversations and analyzing this. So short-term, long-term, short-term, you're going to make less money. If you step out of the shop today, your shop sales are going to be down, right? But also look at that if you use that argument for the long haul, right? Everyone wants to make a short-term argument for really what is hopefully a long-term transition to a true business owner.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that conversation about investment and trade-off of time has to be easier for the financial guy to have the conversation because they're
It's hard for me
linear
too.
investment.
It's hard for anyone, right? You're close to this stuff. You've been doing it for years, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not the best at this. I still do tax returns for free, but also just a business owner. A lot of this is if you get too far removed from this, you can't make the right decisions, right? I still talk to clients. I still do numbers. I still do books. I still do tax returns on this stuff, but that allows me to talk and have these conversations and not only guide my clients, but I think guide my business and where it needs to go.
Yeah. And I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the importance of your customers and shop owners everywhere actually understanding what it is that they're buying when they're joining a coaching program or working with somebody to help with their finances or working with a marketing person. I think it's really important that they understand. On our side, we hear from our clients a lot about what's my cost per lead. And to your point earlier, you don't want more sales, you want more profit. And for us, the numbers that we try to shift focus towards is customer acquisition cost. You want to know what it costs to get that customer in the door, and then you want to know what their lifetime gross profit is.
Yep.
And if we can figure those numbers out, marketing becomes a really fun game. And what do you see on your end? Because we're not qualified to talk to it maybe to that level, but what do you see on your end in a marketing partner or when marketing comes into play that's a common mistake that shops make?
Oh man, there is a lot of common mistakes on it, right? I would say that the first common mistake on advertising is where most people lead their first question to me, right? So anyone that asks me about advertising, their first thing is a benchmark question. They say, what is the average shop spending as a percentage of sales on advertising? So I always give that answer, and I always say that is a very crappy number that you have to be extremely careful with. So I won't do you guys a disservice. I will give you the number. I won't bury the lead. But of all of our clients, we benchmark all of our clients. Average shop is spending right around 3% of their sales on advertising. However, the reason why I say that is a terrible number is you are going to be left in the middle where there's really two groups. Half of our clients are spending 5 to 6% of their sales on advertising. The other half of our clients, late stage businesses, unique markets, they don't do anything on advertising besides maybe write off their season tickets, right? So what I tell people at the end of the day is benchmarks are just that. They give me a very good indicator, right? So if you are listening to this and you're looking at your shop's financials, where that 3% comes in is a sanity check to what you're currently feeling, right? Your numbers are your business, right? So let's make sure that they make sense. If I got a client that calls me up, let's say Paul calls me up and says, Hunt, business is slow, phone's not ringing, this really sucks. And I look at his financials and I see Paul spending 1% of his sales on advertising. Does the expectation match up to the reality? Hey, you have below average car count, below average demand, and you're doing below average advertising, right? So should we really be that surprised? Now, if I go and I turn around and I look and Paul's spending 8-10% of his sales on advertising, yeah, Paul, we have an issue, right? So does one necessarily mean the other? No, but it's a great guideline to start really triaging this stuff. When it comes down to advertising, though, I preach it the same way I preach my services, right? We are expensive. If you compare what we do to your current accountant, we are probably more expensive. I will guarantee that we give you more value, right? And so whenever you're looking at advertisers, I'm never looking at cost, I'm looking at value. Customer acquisition cost is buried in here, but the example I like to give people is this, right? If I go to you guys and say, hey, if I give you $2,000, how much in new sales will you give me? And you say, Hunt, you give us $2,000, we'll give you $10,000 in new sales, right? You don't need to know gross profit. You don't need to know any of this stuff. What am I going to say? If I give you 4, will you give me 20? If I give you 6, will you give me 30? So how much I spend to you, maybe that's 100% of my monthly sales right now, right? What a terrible metric to actually use. So use this, see if you're on the right track. I've heard other rules of thumbs here should be 3% of what your desired sales level is, 6% of what their desired sales level is. But again, it's just that, right? No offense to Paul and David, but you'd probably say the same thing. You should spend as little with us as you possibly can to give the amount of cars that you have, right? If you guys can give someone their desired results for $500 a month on it, you guys are going to be happy, right? But in the long run, it's guys, we need to know what you need for cars, and we're going to try to get that customer acquisition cost. But if that customer acquisition cost is $200 and that customer is worth 10 grand for you, do you really even care for spending 300 or 400 or 500? It just doesn't matter when the math starts working like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What comes to mind is we actually have that same conversation on a slightly different level with all of our clients or potential clients. We let them know, hey, we're going to do a lot of legwork up front. The heavy lift is on the front end. And the reason that is because we'd like, for you to outrun our services. At some point, we'd like for you to organically be ranking and doing the best that you can, that you don't need to be spending as much money on the front end. And we'll also have some systems to help capture some of those clients so that they stay with you on a day in, day out, year in, year out, and make your company more profitable in the long run. So when you want to exit or when you want to expand to a new location, you have that stability in mind. I think a lot of people get very much glitter-eyed when it comes to advertising or marketing. They're like, oh, I got to go on Facebook and I got to do all these things. It's like, wait, before we do that, let's get the fundamentals in place, which is going to cost you a little bit up front. But in the long run, it's going to be the cheapest thing you can do for yourself and for your company.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people cheap out on that and they get what they pay for, right? And so like I have some people coasting with that 3%, right? They're like, I'm not spending a ton, so I don't expect a ton, and they don't really get anything. And so that's what I usually say is like people in those extremes are getting their advertising dollars, right? You're spending 0, right? You got word of mouth. Cool. You're getting your money. You're paying nothing. The guy's spending 6%. They're talking to you guys. They're giving feedback. They're giving expectations. I got so many people out there spending $600-800 a month, and they're just burning that money, right? It's going to a coupon thing that no one cares about. It's going to a reward program that your advisors aren't even updating, right? So again, like who cares what you're spending? How much money is that getting back? If you have an answer for every single one of your advertising dollars, cool. But guys, I think you can also attest to this. How are people ever going to measure this if they're not tracking the source of their new customers either?
Yeah, that's funny because that leads right into the next question. What's the smartest decision when it comes to the counter and the data entry and all? How do you determine what's the best source for all that?
Yeah, just get something on it, right? 98% is better than 2%. Generally, when I start having these conversations on it, like you guys track all of this data. You guys do a very bad job of actually holding your counter team accountable for that. So you guys see this on the shop management software. The source report stinks, right? 80% is always unknown or repeat customer when we know it's not the case. So you guys have this data point, use it, right? So if a customer comes in, you have a process and procedure. How'd you hear about us? Put it in there. This is how you measure it. Even on stuff that I see on my end, right? A lot of times I will look at a profitability report by category in your shop management system, and all of them say no category, right? Like, you have so much data. Start going down through these reports. Don't leave credits that you have for vendors stuck in there, even though you know it's returned. You have so much of this stuff, and sometimes people are their own worst enemy of just not having these conversations and holding people accountable to just use the system as it's intended to be used.
Yeah, and that it's a great point where you have to understand this, and you have to have the time, the capacity, and the want to actually dig into some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people like us, vendors like us in the industry, come through, yourself and Paul and I. What does it take for a great partnership between a shop owner and their accountant or financial advisor? What does that look like on your side?
It looks at a lot of different ways. We talked a lot of different things, right? Bookkeeping, accounting, taxes. And I'll say my clients, if you polled my clients, we work with 650 around about shop groups on a monthly basis. Some of those are 8, 10 locations. Some of those are 1 locations. All of them will say a different thing on it, but really what we give them is peace of mind, right? Peace of mind comes in a lot of different formats, right? Maybe it's a tax plan. Maybe it's a valuation because you're trying to sell to your kid. Maybe you just started this and you're terrified. You don't understand anything about numbers, anything about bookkeeping. We see people at such different stages of their life and such different kind of objectives, but no matter what it is, tailoring to make sure that they have it. The number one thing that you need to have with your accountant is a relationship and a level of trust. I don't do a ton of sales anymore, but when I did, a lot of times they turned into nothing because I'm honest. If you have been with your accountant for 10 years and you're very happy with what they do and you understand your financials, you understand your taxes, I'll tell you right now, don't call me, right? You have a good relationship. I'm not going to be the one to break that up because I think it's just that. There's a lot of this is opinions, right? Everything I've spouted off today is just Hunt's opinion and Hunt's view on a repair shop. And if that aligns with what you're trying to do, then you're going to love working with us and you're going to love the team. Some people are looking for different stuff, right? But you want to be able to have that trust level where if you're unsure about something, you can call up a member of your team and say, hey, what would you do here? What are other shops doing? What are the pros and cons on this? So that at the end of the day, they can make the right decision for what they're trying to do.
Yeah, that's perfect. That aligns exactly what we tell people. We do an evaluation, we do all these things, but at the end of the day, if they're not harming you and they're doing something very favorable for you, there is no need to change. In fact, we clap those other professionals that are taking care of their clients because that's the point. We're in a service business. It's important that they take care of their people. And for us over here, David and myself, it goes back to our mission, right? Our mission is to make this industry stronger. And that doesn't mean taking business from people that are doing things the right way. We're looking for those shops that are struggling or don't have the right partnerships in place that they can succeed in whatever they want to do. And that actually brings me up to the next point. Like when it comes to shop owners that are listening and they don't have a numbers guy, or they do have a numbers guy, and that person isn't quite helping, what are some of the red flags that they should just keep at the back of their mind as they're going through their partnership?
Like you said, there's a lot of people out there doing good work. There's a lot of people out there doing bad work. One of the things that we do for a lot of people is saying, hey, if you want a spot check on this one, we do free tax reviews. It really goes one of 3 different ways. It's, hey, well prepared. Keep on keeping on. I'll tell the guy it looks pretty good. Maybe little stuff here, but generally people have understanding this. We have the opposite ones. There are some people out there doing some pretty bad work, just mailing it in, not looking at stuff, negative 350,000 for a loan, like just wacky stuff where we're like, who did this? Yeah, we have an honest conversation of, hey, you have an actual issue here, right? You don't have to hire me. You got to fire these people that you're working with. Generally, though, it ends up being somewhere in the middle, right? Where your accountant's doing a good job, but they're not really searching, right? They set you up fine 5 years ago. No one's looking at this stuff. Yeah, you're on payroll, but you're paying yourself too much in payroll. And even some of those, right? If you have a good relationship, hey, go back and tell David X, Y, and Z. He'll change it. You'll be fine. You liked everything else he was doing. Cool. But really just going down and figuring out what people have going on and figuring out what kind of relationship that they have. Yeah. And like I said, some of them's a fit, some of them's not, but really just trying to figure out if we are going to be able to add value. Because like I said, it's one of the questions we ask, how long you been with your accountant? I'm looking for long-term relationships. You want to spin something up 6 months, get out of it. probably not the shop for you, right? Because we're looking to build and be a member of their team and not really just a vendor transaction on just a one-off basis.
Yeah, and I love that you always, like, both in our prep call and today, you're always bringing it back to value. It's not just how many clients can I sign for Paar Melis. It's how can we make sure that we're bringing the most value to shop owners in the industry. And that's one of the things I really love about you in the conversation, man, is just your dedication to wanting to see these shop owners win. And there's more than enough business in this world for vendors in the automotive space. And to your point, more than enough people doing it bad that we don't have to shit on the guys that are doing it good.
Exactly.
I want to take a second and zoom out because I know that the industry's changing and there's a ton of like private equity firms coming in and a lot of talk about valuation, a lot of people that are older in the industry who are looking at getting out.
Yeah.
When owners hear that private equity side, they get excited or they get nervous.
Yeah.
What should they be focused on when it comes to valuation readiness, even if they're not selling soon, and especially if they are looking to sell?
So at the end of the day, the best way to have a valuable shop is make more money, right? So there's not a whole lot of numbers games on this. If you want to go straight private equity, right, there's ways that you can spin up a business that is very attractive to private equity, none of which I would voice on here because I don't think it's advisable, right? If you try to build a business to sell and you don't succeed in selling it, you usually have a pretty crappy business. But yeah, private equity is here to stay. One of my clients was the first one of one of these groups. We saw it about 6 years ago, I think at this point, starting to come into it. But during COVID, it exploded. Majority of my clients that sold last year, I think around 60% of the sales that we were a part of were to private equity groups. More private equity groups are buying our shops than non-private equity groups. As far as the good and the bad on it, honestly, I think it's a net positive for every single person listening to this that is not a customer of these shops, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I am one of these customers, right? I do a lot of my own work, but at some point I am forced to deal with you guys. Yeah, I would much rather deal with my client that is the third generation than it is the third branch of some private equity conglomerate, right? These guys are very good at do one thing and one thing only, and that's making money. They don't really care about customer experience. They don't care about anything else unless it's making money for them or an ultimate sale. The good news is for my customers, it's been the best exit we've ever seen. Before private equity, I didn't really have anyone come into a massive payday from their shop. Valuations were pretty standard on this stuff. Got some people that were very wealthy because of real estate, right? But that's a natural thing. Just had a shop, 3 shops they sold for over $12 million. No real estate involved on this stuff. Just some numbers that we've never seen because an individual investor just doesn't have the access to capital. You cannot get a $12 million SBA note. It doesn't exist, right? There's limits to this stuff. So I think it's really cool to see this. Like, this has been in the collision side for 20 years. Collision side is extremely consolidated. But also, if you look at a lot of the shops that are out there, it's like whether they know it or not, you've built a business that you're going to have to sell to private equity. If your business is doing more than $3 or $4 million in sales, you're selling to private equity, whether you know it or not. So the cool part about it is, hey, if private equity wasn't around, you got a 5-8 location kind of business going on there. It's going to be very hard to find a buyer, and you probably need to piecemeal that off like a lot of my multi-location guys did in the past. Now, though, probably, depending on where you are, have 3 to 5 guys that are throwing some really crazy numbers at my clients. Good in a lot of ways, bad in breaking up some family businesses, maybe not the best for the employees, but like we talk about all the time, right? If you're a technician, you don't like where you're working, drive out of the shop that you're working at and drive into the shop that you want to work at, and they'll most likely hire you, right? And if you can't find a job, email me and I'll get you hired at one of my shops. But if they won't hire you, you probably aren't a good technician. So
that's a really good point.
Yeah. If you can't get a job as a technician right now and you consider yourself an A-Tech, then I got news for you. You might not be an A-Tech.
Might not even be a B-Tech.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Guys are desperate out there.
Yeah, exactly. If you call yourself an A-Tech, there's probably a shop that will hire you as an A-Tech. Yeah.
Yeah. Got that A-Tech skill, but that like D-Tech personality.
Yeah. That probably hit home for too many shops listening, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. We can laugh about it because we support these guys every day.
Exactly.
Pain, but
we don't have to work alongside them.
No.
Yeah.
So as we move this along with our listeners, one thing I'd love to do is just give them some actionables, some plans that they can take. Is there one report they should pull? Is there like one meeting they should schedule this week? Is there one habit they should install it if they don't have it so they can get going? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I think it always starts somewhere, right? You might have been told in the past that this is something that you can't understand. You're never going to understand it, right? There are people that are much stupider than you that are very strong in their financials, right? This is not rocket science. It all starts with something. Like I said, I've been doing it for 20 years, right? What's that, 40,000 hours of doing this stuff? Yeah, I look at this all day, every day. It's the only thing that I do. You've never looked at it before, right? So your understanding is probably directly related to how many hours you've spent on this stuff. So really, that's a big push on this, right? Maybe you tried it 10 years ago. It wasn't for you. Whether you want to grow your business, whether you want to keep your business surviving, whether you want to sell this to private equity or anyone else, it's 2026, right? You got to know the numbers. It's just no way around it, and start somewhere.
Okay. Yeah. And I think for people who are out there looking to learn their numbers, you've got your own podcast that's by the numbers, business by the numbers. Talk about a little bit just what you cover on that show so that any listeners of ours can try to get some of that information.
Yeah, so shameless plug, Business by the Numbers. We are now at episode 210 this morning. So been doing this over 4 years, hundreds of episodes. What do I talk about? It's what my shops are asking me, right? So some of it's about divorce. Some of it is about Social Security benefits. Some of it's about, should you be an S corporation, or how much should you pay yourself? Or how do you do internal tickets for warranties and loaner cars? So my general idea on it is, I have a shop owner asking, someone else is probably wondering the same thing. So most of this stuff is just that. A lot of it is also to just break down what you're hearing in the news, right? You heard about inflation. You heard about interest rates. You know that's affecting the economy and your business. How does that actually relate to repair shops? And how are we seeing that affect parts prices and gross profit? So really the big piece of this is just education, right? I want people to understand what's going on in their business, what's going on in the larger economy, so that they can make the best decisions for themselves. Yeah. We're living in a day and age where there's so much information out there. Not all of it's going to directly apply to you, but it should be a really good foundation to start asking the right questions.
Yeah, that's great. And again, if you haven't listened to the show yet and you're in this industry, one, you might be living under a rock, but two, really, if you haven't listened to the show yet, Hunt's giving away tons of value on that show that guys who have paid for real financial help in this industry haven't received yet. Go and listen to it. It's incredibly valuable. And so I want to ask you something next for us that's really important. Obviously, we're the Honest Garage podcast. We own the company Honest Mechanic Marketing. That phrase honest is really personal. And what we've learned is it's not just personal to us, it's really personal to everybody that we bring on the show. Yeah. And I want to hear from your perspective, when you hear the phrase honest mechanic or honest shop or even honest financial advisor, like what does that mean to you personally? How is that applied to the way that your shop owners work and that you guys work?
I think that we have to have some honesty there on who we're talking to. We're in different professions. So like how honest I am with maybe some taxing agencies and stuff like that, there could be a bit tongue in cheek there. But no, when it comes down to it, we don't do anything illegal. We don't do anything that is something that's going to get our clients into trouble. And I like to have an open, honest conversation of where they stand. Hey, I didn't make the tax rules. I didn't make the money, but hey, we got some options on how we can change this, right? And a lot of this comes down to people's risk appetite. Like I said, I will never file a tax return that's going to send my client to jail. I will file tax returns that we could end up in tax court or having conversations, because if you get aggressive, there's going to be people that push back on that. But really, that's what people want, is an honest conversation of how I stand, right? Hey, am I leaving anything out there? Is there anything that I could be doing differently? I think that a lot of these tax returns that I review is people aren't doing honest work, right? They're doing this stuff. They're looking at it. They know that David is paying too much in payroll taxes, but is that dishonesty by not going and sharing it with someone? I feel like that I have a liability to share this, right? I talk about this stuff all the time, right? This is why I've published multiple books. I do all these podcasts. I don't want to have this information and have people not being able to make the right decisions for themselves and it costing them money. So am I always honest in it? Right. You can ask my friends and family, probably not. Right. But in a way of sharing this with people and making sure that people are getting what I feel is the best for them and their business. Yeah, that's what we strive for every day.
Well, I think it's important for people to understand that there are options out there. And in your industry in particular, people want to maybe call them loopholes or whatever. But the fact is that the laws are written in a way that they're written, and smart people are taking advantage of them. And it's nice to have somebody in your corner that understands what the law actually is and where the line is so you can toe it without crossing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's going to wrap up the time that we have for this episode today of the Honest Garage Podcast Specialist Series. I just want to say thanks again, Hunt, for taking the time to be on the show with us today, and Paar Melis and Associates for letting you do your show that's so valuable. Before we actually sign off, I want to give people an opportunity to connect with you. And what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so we'll put all of it in here. I should memorize our numbers. I'll put in our main phone numbers, 301-829-4646. So if you just want to call, you want to talk to us about it, have a question on it, always open, give me a shout. Info@Paar Melis is the best way if you got a question on this. I want to talk to us about accounting, tax services, or even just want to kind of shoot me a message on something you've been wondering. Always going to answer that stuff. But yeah, put all the links in the show notes for the books, the podcast, and contact us and all that good stuff.
Yeah. And so for the people out there, like the book that we mentioned earlier was Beyond the Bays, the Business by the Numbers podcast. Hunt's not a hard guy to find.
And if you're listening and you want one takeaway from today, it's this: your numbers aren't there to impress your accountant. They're there to help you make decisions with confidence. Pick 5, track them consistently, and don't just look at reports. Use them to answer real questions. Are we actually profitable? Are we just busy? Are we pricing? Where are we at with our team? Use those numbers. And if you don't understand them, find a professional that can help you.
Yeah. And the promise that we want to make with this specialist series as we continue to do more and more of these is that we're going to continue to bring our listeners experts who really understand this stuff. We're not going to pretend that we're your financial advisor or that we can help you figure out your insurance needs or any of the rest of this. But we are committed to bringing you a bunch of no bullshit, good people that really just want to help the industry. And I think that's really important. If you're looking for more of that, go ahead and search wherever you're listening to this podcast and look for the specialist series, and you'll find more helpful, actionable insight from other experts outside of just the great shop owner stories we normally have. And then if you got value from today's episode, I want you to do me a favor real quick. Please like the show, share the show with somebody that's going to get value from this. Hunt shared tons of value with us today on the show, and we appreciate that. And we want to get the word out. Review the show. It helps us as much as it helps you guys in the shop. And if you want to have a conversation about marketing, obviously we're happy to do that as well.
If there's any topics that you want us to bring on with regards to experts, shoot us an email, hit us up in the comments, and we'll make that happen. We want every single one of you shop owners out there to be successful. So if you want more information, let us know.
Yeah. And that's going to do it for us today on the Honest Garage Podcast Specialist Series. As always, keep it honest in the garage, everybody.
That's the stuff I like doing, like driving off-road. I had a Tacoma at the time. And so I was like, that sounds more in line with what I like to do.
Was the one that I started my automotive career at, actually, but we didn't cross paths there. But we both worked at the same dealer. So I was there in parts, and then I transitioned from parts into the trainee service tech side.